Hello, and welcome to my movie review. Today I will be reviewing the movie We Were Children by Tim Woloshatiuk. The genre of the movie is a drama movie, and a little bit more specifically, it is sort of a documentary drama movie mixed in two. The movie We Were Children is about the horrors of residential school, and specifically the drastic and long lasting effects it had on the Aboriginal boys and girls who were forced there in order to kill the Indian inside of them. In the movie, it's about two survivors, Greg Anaquode and Lyka Hart, and they're interviewed in their present day, so like old age, relatively, and to speak about their experiences at these schools. The movie is composed of flashback scenes to their youth at these residential schools, and it's also composed of interviews with the present day survivors. The setting of the film is spent predominantly at the residential schools. However, some of the setting early on is spent at Lyka's house. Prior to being sent there at the residential school, she lived on an Aboriginal reserve and with horses on the reserve on her house, like near her house, and the horses sort of provide a motif later in the film as it reminds her of home in comparison to the horrors that she faced at the school. It's where she'd sort of retreat to in order to feel safe when the abuse of the residential school was happening to her. The movie pretty much it deals with Greg and Lyka's experiences at the residential schools, where they were being forced to learn English when they had no prior experience with it at all. They were being forced to learn about the Christian religion and how to recite prayers that they didn't even understand what they were saying, but they were being forced to speak it anyways. And if they didn't comply, they faced really brutal discipline, like whipping of their hands and just abuse by the nuns and priests that would teach them. The movie also touches on other really horrible parts of residential schooling, which were also touched upon in 3 Day Road a little bit, which was like rape. Like the rape of children happened there, and it was relatively it was more frequent than you'd imagine that these priests and nuns who represented like a religion, like the purity of religion, who were raping children. And there was also the starvation of children by priests and nuns when they were being fed like gruel compared to the nuns and priests who were being fed much better food. Two more important characters other than Greg and Lyka and their friends who are minor characters are the two nuns that teach Greg and Lyka as well. The two nuns there's one called Sister Mary, who is definitely on the more empathetic side. So it just sort of goes to show that the Christian religion, or maybe not the religion, but more so just the authority figures at the school weren't all horrible people. Because when you portray, you have the evil people, and then you have to portray them. And if you portray them all as, truly horrible human beings, then it doesn't exactly seem realistic, right? But when you have Sister Mary in the film, who's trying to, be the best kind of teacher that she could, she tries to feed the children better, and she tries to she doesn't discipline them nearly as harshly as anyone else. And then there's the other sister who's unnamed in the film, and she's a much harsher, older version as well of Sister Mary. So it also might be a bit of it might show what will happen to Sister Mary in the future, that she might become like this older, harsher teacher for these young school children. So the main conflict of the film is it's person versus person, really. It's Greg and Lyka struggling with themselves to resist against the attacks on their culture and the physical, the forced beatings and the forced teachings. And during all this time, with all the struggles they're facing, they all have a longing for home, and they're wondering how they're gonna survive their forced experience at these residential schools. And so that's definitely the main conflict of the film. So the movie does not use soundtrack very much at all. With when the time is spent during the interviews, it's just quiet, right, in order to show respect for the survivors who are speaking their story. And but sometimes during the flashbacks to when the children are young and they're playing at the residential school, or they're in class, or in other times where they're being tortured, there sometimes a little bit of music is played in the background to sort of show the audience what they should be feeling. So if, for example, there's a scene where if the director wants to make the audience feel like sad or maybe feel like claustrophobic, they'll play sort of like a low, unsettling tone in the background. But there really isn't music or like a really like rich soundtrack in this movie. It's mostly just quiet. No real soundtrack to be found in this movie. But I'll show you an example of the sort of tone that sometimes the director uses in the movie in order to help the audience feel what he feels that they should be like experiencing at the time. So this is an example of the soundtrack. It's sort of a gentle sound that's trying to show Sister Mary's empathy towards Glenn after he's been tortured by the priest at the school. So the director does get the intended reaction from the audience using the limited soundtrack they do use to provoke sort of the emotion of the audience, and it works pretty well. In that scene that I just showed you, the music is very like I'm not sure what kind of word to use, very redeeming sort of. It makes the audience feel happy for Glenn, and now the fact that he's not being hurt anymore, and that this Sister Mary is trying to take care of him. So now to comment on the camera work of the movie, the camera work used in this film is it's excellent. The director uses angles and lighting very effectively, and especially during the close-ups of the faces during the interview segments of the movie. The camera work is also very excellent when portraying sort of important characters in the film, like the father figure of the church, like people with authority. And because what he does is he does a close-up of their face, and it appears like they're kind, right? Like they have a smile on their face, but you can also see sort of hidden beneath the anger and just the sort of power struggle they have. Like they really want to exert their power on these children. So yeah, I'll show you a scene of an example of the camera work used in the film.
But you will learn how to pray, and to whom to pray. The savage and carefree ways you are accustomed to are over. Your old world is dying, but we in the civilized world want to save you from certain death. We welcome you here with open arms, open hearts, and open minds. This is the last time you will hear your own language. To be understood in this country, to survive in its industries, you will learn to speak English. You will learn to think in English, and you will be the better for it.
To the food, I couldn't tolerate the food. I wasn't used to the porridge that was like glue. Powdered milk that was made into milk. My body was used to food that was totally natural, like moose meat and berries.
Those were the two examples I used for camera work in the film, which I thought was excellent. One thing I noticed was that the director really tried to focus on showing emotions expressed in the face of the characters. In the example I showed you, you saw the father of the church, like the father figure, and you can really see like the emotion behind his face and how he wants to mold these innocent young Aboriginal children into someone who will work like the industries of Canada and things like that. And it just, you can see sort of the power he feels like he has in his face, and how he has this very like big, like he really wants to impose his authority on these young children. And I think that's very evident thanks to the camera work used in the film, as well as the camera work used during the other scene I showed you with the survivor, that is Lyka in present day interviewing the director of the film. And it's really just, I think that the manner in which he uses camera work, it really lets you see the emotion of the characters. And in the case with Lyka, you can really see just how painful the struggles of residential school were for her. and it's really well expressed in the face of the characters, and I thought that was excellent in terms of the movie. So that's it for camera work. Now to talk about stereotypes expressed in the film. The film We Were Children doesn't really portray any stereotypes of this Hollywood Indian type stereotype thing as expressed in Real Indian, which we watched in class. There's no noble savage really stereotype or the drunken Indian stereotype. However, Greg does at one point in the movie talk about his experiences with alcoholism after coming out of the residential school. I mean, that's not a stereotype because in this case it's a sad truth of what happened to him, because alcoholism really it's a problem with Aboriginal society. But yeah, so there aren't really any stereotypes, no Hollywood Real Indian stereotypes expressed in this film. So now to select one scene that's really symbolic in the author's use of detail in the shots, as well as symbolizing a lot of significance to character development and theme. Right now, what we're looking at is there's Sister Mary, who's the empathetic nun, and she is confronting this priest over here that imprisoned young Greg into some sort of like prison in his basement. And so she's confronting him and she's freeing Greg. And I'll just play that scene for you right now.
It's not right, Jesus, what you're doing to that boy.
Attends. Laisse ce garçon seul, tu m'entends? Tu m'entends?
Les gens s'en foutent si tu... Ah.
So I chose that scene in order to show the importance of the film. Like, that's the reasoning behind why that scene was so important, is that it really shows just how corrupt and how like messed up residential schools could be sometimes. Where that young innocent Greg was just thrown from the normal, terrible residential school and thrown to some underground prison by the priest. For no real reason at all. It just seemed like he expressed a longing to go home, and literally just for expressing that longing, he was thrown into that prison, which is horrible. And in terms of character development, that was sort of the breaking point for Greg when he really started to discover just how terrible the schools were. Because when the children were first taken to the schools, yeah, they were losing their culture and being forced to speak English, but as far as this movie shows, it wasn't like that bad until you really get to the darker side of the residential schools, like the rape and the imprisonment like this, and the harsh discipline. So in terms of character development, that's really when Greg, as a young boy, really sees how just terrible the school is. Well, it can be in some sense. And as well, it's when Sister Mary sort of notices that this residential schooling isn't as nice or as peaceful as it portrays to be, but in reality it does have a dark side, and that really develops the two characters shown in the film, as well as the theme, which I'm going to be touching upon very soon. But the theme that it's really wrong to indoctrinate a culture and to wipe it out just for the sake of like eliminating that culture from your society. And really, like that this is one of that scene really showed one of the effects of this, that when the government, for example the government of Canada, when it decided to do this whole residential schooling thing to kill the Indian inside the Indian children, that this is one of the effects, like this is one of the consequences that could occur, is innocent young boys or girls as well being thrown into underground prisons, like things like that. Like, no, it's not all the people that went to residential schools thrown into some underground prison, obviously, but it's one of the effects. And the fact that this happened is atrocious. The fact that this happened in a government funded like residential school, like this movie really opened my eyes to just what exactly went on back at that time, and I can't believe it myself. So for an overall assessment of the film We Were Children, I thought it was an excellent film, and it really does open your eyes to the topic of residential schools and just how drastic and terrible and how long-lasting the effects it had were on the young, innocent boys and girls sent there and forced to go there by the government of Canada. And they had their culture just stolen from them at these schools, and it was just such a terrible thing that happened. So the theme of the film that I touched on is that the lesson of the film, I'd say, is that it's really crucial to respect and love the many different cultures of this world and of your community. That trying to like cleanse rich, vibrant cultures that surround you is an absolutely terrible thing to do, and that we really need to respect and cherish the richness of the world around us and the cultures around us as well. This message is, in my opinion, definitely a useful one, and it's useful to everyone just because of how universal it is. You won't find many people agreeing with the topic of just like the destruction of the culture of a people, but obviously it does happen sometimes if residential schools were a thing for such a long time. And the fact that they only closed, I think it was like in the 1970s, is just it's very surprising. I'd never think that this would happen in our own country, like in Canada of all countries as well. So without the respect for other people's cultures, this like residential schools, things like this happen, and this hate of different cultures is one of the main reasons that this cycle of hate continues in our modern world today. That this hate for the opposite culture, that this other country and their people, and you hate them because of their culture, and it really is a problem, and not just. It's also relevant like to today's society right now. Residential schools might have closed. Well, they're not open anymore, obviously, but there's still many survivors from those schools that still have to live with the effects of what happened there. And the government of Canada did issue an apology, but just what does that apology do to the survivors that had to go there? So overall, this film is excellent. It's phenomenal in my opinion, and it's relatively short too. So I'd really urge everyone to give it a try. Just give it a watch. It's on Netflix. It really does. It's a very enriching experience, and it really teaches you just how terrible things like just how terrible residential schools were, and also just the fact that this thing could happen. Also, it really goes into the effects that it has on a person's psyche and a person's mental state with the two survivors shown in the film. So an excellent film. I'd give it like 9 out of 10. Very, very, very good film. And it really does open your eyes to the topic of residential schools, and it really lets you learn more about the struggles of Aboriginal society. Thank you.